This is What If I Told You, the event psychology video podcast for event professionals, in which Victoria Mady, event consultant and host, talks with the world's top minds in behavioral science, neuroscience, and psychology on how to transform events using insights about human behavior and mind.
Hello, I'm Victoria Mady, and this is What If I Told You, the event psychology podcast, where I talk all things event psychology, that is how to apply brain science insights in events. And today my guest is Dr. Hayley Lewis, who is an award-winning psychologist with more than 20 years of experience in the field of organizational and business psychology. Her specific area of expertise is leadership and management behavior and how this can affect culture and performance, and she spends most of her time supporting organizations of all sizes on these issues. Hayley's academic research is in entrepreneurship and the psychology of success for women in business. And she helps women wanting to make the move from corporate employee to self-employed business owner. Hayley regularly shares practical evidence-based tools and tips via social media, and in 2021, Hayley was identified as one of the most influential thinkers in HR by HR magazine. Now, I've been following Hayley on Twitter for many years, and at first I came across her brilliant sketch notes, a visual summary of various psychological models, books, and frameworks she shares regularly. And today we will talk about some of those frameworks and how they can be used by event professionals. Welcome, Hayley.
Thank you for having me, Victoria.
Thank you for coming to the show. Okay, let's get to it. Since my focus is on marrying psychology and events, my first questions are about events and your event experience. So I assume you attend events too, right? So can you share what's the most bizarre or fun event experience that ever happened to you?
Oh gosh. Well, actually, I don't just attend events. Actually, before I trained as a psychologist, so when I was in my early 20s, I actually worked as a conference coordinator, so supporting events. So I've been the other side of it as well, a very long time ago. So I've seen both sides of it.
All right,
yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. I suppose that the strangest thing actually was when I was in that kind of role. So I started out at the BBC, and one of my first roles at the BBC, as I say, before I trained as a psychologist, was in conference management. So I got to meet some famous people who shall remain nameless. And I think the strangest thing, I was asked to do was to lend a very famous woman my dress because her outfit couldn't take the lapel mic, and we had no other mic to give her, whereas I had an outfit on that at that point, so we're talking about the 90s here, so technology was very limited. So I had an outfit where it could accommodate a lapel mic. So yeah, having to swap outfits with a famous person is probably one of the strangest things. I haven't really had anything like that, being the other side as somebody who attends and talks at events and conferences.
Right. Wow, what a story.
Now that is called being committed to your job.
Exactly. I was going to say that, but I think, a lot of event professionals can totally relate, and, absolutely. Technology these days is much more sophisticated, right? But I guess we're still having a lot of stories like that happening. Wow. I think
I've thrown you, haven't I, Victoria?
Your story. So far, this story is number one on my chart. Okay, so now my other question will be, what is your favorite psychological concept?
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's like asking what if I don't have children, but if I did, that'd be like asking me what my favourite child was. What's my favourite concept? I suppose if you're going to force me to choose... my favourite would be self-efficacy. So that's from the work of Albert Bandura, a very famous, renowned psychologist. he came up with the concept of self-efficacy, the theory of self-efficacy, more than 50 years ago now. And self-efficacy is essentially having the belief, the self-belief that you've got what it takes to achieve a successful outcome to a goal. And we can get that belief from a number of ways. So by tapping into our past experience, so for example, saying to ourselves, I've done it before, so I can do it again, or having role models. So that's where mentors can come in useful, or visualization, which is something that, for example, Olympic athletes do, is they visualize themselves winning the race, going through the finish line. So self-efficacy, I think, has come up so much during my own career, but it also in my research into successful female business owners, but and also in the work that I do with leaders. So yeah, self-efficacy, if you are going to be mean and make me choose.
All right. Okay. Well, that's a great concept to dig into, and I'm looking forward to, reading up more about that. Brilliant. As well, because I think it's a lot of people in the events industry are women, and I think your work and your research on that, and specifically on self-efficacy, would be interesting to look into. Now, your title is business psychologist. Do you find it difficult or easy to explain what you do? Well, and my second part would be why businesses need a psychologist.
Okay, so in the UK, so I'm in the United Kingdom, so my actual formal designated title is occupational psychologist. So that's what we call a protected title in the UK. So the British Psychological Society, there are a number of disciplines. So for example, clinical psychology and forensic, and occupational is the title that's protected, and that's my official title. But it can be quite confusing for people. So sometimes over the years, I've had clients confuse it, for example, with occupational therapy, and it's a fundamentally different thing. So right. That's why I often refer to myself as either just a psychologist or organisational psychologist or business psychologist, because people get that. But anyway, in terms of why do I think businesses, organisations need psychology and people like myself, because most of us spend a vast proportion of our lives doing work in some shape or form. So for some of us, particularly those who work full time, whether that's inside an organisation as an employee, or whether you're running a business, or even if you're doing non-paid work, as we know that parents and carers can do. Work takes up a large proportion of our lives. And for many of us, we can spend more time at work doing our work than we do with our friends and family. And so actually creating conditions where people can do their best work, be their best selves, be satisfied and happy and motivated, that's surely a good thing to aim for. But it's not just about the individual. We know, research shows it time and time again. Happier, more motivated and committed employees at all levels impact the bottom line of businesses, and so again, it's in organisations' interests to create the conditions that mean that employees can thrive, and that ultimately the bottom line can thrive as well, and that can have benefits far more wide-ranging than the organisation itself. It can impact communities, with money being kind of put into communities and helping vulnerable people. And so one way for organisations to do that is to work with people such as psychologists who have a deep insight into an understanding of what a high-performance organisation looks like, and the things that can help people do their best work and be their best selves.
Right. Wow, that's really interesting. I came across your Twitter via sketch notes, and I find it fantastic. Straight to the point, visually appealing, and informative at the same time. And at events, we sometimes use similar visuals or even, light scribing to picture the essence of the session. And I personally find it a great way to capture the information. So my question is, how did you come up with the idea of a sketch note? And do you think people engage with content pictured in this way better?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer your second question first. So out of all the different ways that I put content out and I market what I do, the thing that consistently goes viral, and I mean viral in some instances, are the sketch notes. And that's why I now do them. They're the thing that I do the most, because it's the thing that seems to connect with the audience that I'm trying to connect with the most. How did I come to sketch notes? So when I started my business, I started Halo Psychology in the summer of 2016, and rather naive, I fell into the trap that so many of us fall into. I ignored all the advice and instead focused on what's my colours going to be, and what does my website look like, and where are my business cards, back when we used to have business cards, and ignored things like have a business plan, have a marketing plan. And so went out there, left a very highly paid corporate role, which wasn't an easy thing to do, because I'm the main wage earner in my family, and so it was a bit of a risk. And so went out there, and it was just quiet. My network didn't come back to me straight away, and I was putting out the odd blog. I knew that I needed to put content out, and I've always been very digitally savvy. But I was putting out kind of blog posts randomly, and then wondering why no one knew where or who I was. And it got to the winter. So this had been going on 3-4 months. And I was starting to get nervous because I hadn't had any work come through, and our savings pot was going down. So that was very scary, because we've got a mortgage to pay and stuff like that. And I happened to be scrolling through Twitter like yourself, and I came across a sketch note by a guy called Tanmay Vora. So you might have heard of Tanmay. He's the person I look up to when it comes to sketch notes. And it blew my mind. It was just beautifully rendered and just really spoke to me. And I thought, I really like that. Now, I've always liked drawing stuff, and one of my strengths, so whenever I used to get feedback from my team when I was in a leadership role, one of the things that lots of people would say often was a strength of mine was my ability to simplify sometimes really complicated, complex, sometimes unnecessarily complex things. And I think that's why sketch notes spoke to me. And so I gave it a go. I did this free email course, which doesn't exist anymore. And more than anything, I just went on Google and looked up sketch notes and just gave it a go myself. The first one remains in a locked vault and will never, ever see the light of day. But I kind of kept going at it, and I put my first proper one out at about Christmas 2016, and it freaked me out a little bit, because it was like a feeding frenzy. Like, people went crazy for it on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I couldn't keep up. And I actually had to step away for a little bit. But I thought, there's something going on here. This seems to resonate with people. And so I did another couple, and again the same thing. And so I thought, I'm just going to give the people what they want. I think I'd also fallen into the trap of, as a practicing psychologist, I had fallen into this trap of I must be really serious and I must write blog posts in a really serious way, and that's not me. You know, I am an evidence-based practitioner. I take what I do really seriously, but I don't take myself seriously. And I think there's a distinction. And I think you can be a knowledgeable professional and still have a little bit of fun and humour. And I think that's what sketch notes do. So it enables me to communicate sometimes really difficult concepts to the public in a way that hopefully helps them understand some stuff that can help them, but also hopefully might make them curious and want to learn more. There's nothing that makes me happier on LinkedIn, for example, when someone messages or comments in the chat and says, oh, I'm going to go and look up more about this. This is really interesting. That makes me so happy, because I see my job as a psychologist to help people like yourself and others have useful information to help you do what you need to do. So that's a really long-winded answer,
Right.
but hopefully that tells you what you need to know.
I'm loving it. No, and it's actually, you know, it's always so interesting to learn how, you know, the history behind, you know, success or successful points in the professional journey. So, why do you think people find it so appealing?
So I get asked
You know,
this
the
question.
visual content, the visual summary.
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot on podcasts. I think my take on it, Victoria, is we live in a really frantic, always on, hyper-connected, 24/7 world. You know, it's just like constant information. We're in the age of information, aren't we? And it's constant, and so it can feel overwhelming. And for busy professionals doing hard work, you know, when you've got a lot on, but you want to do the best job possible, where do you find time to pick up that book or learn about a complicated psychological theory or concept? And so I think a one-page, colourful, fun summary with a serious point breaks through all that noise we're bombarded with online. And I think that's why they're so popular. I think for me personally, and I've had this feedback from some people that follow me, is they're not sketch notes that they tend not to be sketch notes that just, you know, put out trite stuff. Actually, they're really they're backed up by their evidence-based sketch notes. So I'll share some research and kind of summarize that. And so it makes it even more meaningful and trustworthy for people. That's the feedback I've had as well.
Right. Well, I've personally learned so many from those sketch notes, I can tell you.
Makes me so happy.
A lot of frameworks. No, seriously, it's not every time that you come across similar, you know, sketch notes or visual summaries that you learn from them. And what I like about your sketch notes, they provide the comprehensive models of frameworks. And even if I haven't read the book, I immediately can understand what it is about. So talking about learning, one of your sketch notes was about Kolb's learning cycle.
Yes.
Can we talk about that? Can you explain what it is about?
Yes, the Kolb's learning cycle was developed by a guy called David Kolb. It's been around a while, actually, and so anybody who works, for example, maybe in the area of learning and development, maybe working in training, either as a freelancer or in organisations, or if somebody works as a coach, most people in those kind of professions will be familiar with Kolb's learning cycle. And essentially all all it is saying that we need to have experienced something in order to learn from it. And so we have this experience, say. So say, for example, you have, so when we're talking about event management, you might have a very difficult client and there's a conversation that goes wrong. So that's the experience. And then it's kind of working through the cycle in terms of, okay, what can I learn from that experience and what can I try out that could improve it next time? So there's the kind of experimentation bit. And that's why I think I mean, there's lots of really helpful cycles and frameworks like that, but I think this idea of not judging experiences, so not putting negative judgments onto it. Experiences are just experiences, whether they're good, bad, or ugly. It's what we do with those experiences and how we learn from them and how we think about them, and then the ideas that we can come up with to try and experiment to kind of learn from that experience and anchor it in our minds. So another experience could be learning a new way of doing something, so learning some new software. So you talked about this new platform. So what was what's the experience? Well, the experience is kind of getting to grips with a new podcast platform. What are your thoughts around it? How do you feel about it? What could you try out to make yourself feel comfortable? So what could you experiment to try and feel comfortable? And then once you've experimented, what are your thoughts about that? And then what are the new experiences? And so it goes round and round in a loop. But it's just a way of making sense of stuff that's going on for us and how we can learn from them in a structured way.
And would that be safe to say that it's also about not to be afraid of experiments?
Absolutely.
And
I think there's a real power, Victoria, in using words like experiment. So I do a lot of one-to-one coaching, and I know some coaches and even some of my clients use the word homework, which I find really interesting. So I know some coaches will ask their clients at the end of each session, what's your homework going to be? And in fact, some of my clients say that to me. They'll say, my homework's going to be whatever. Now, I tend not to use the word homework, because I just think for many of us, it can have negative connotations, can't it? It can just feel like, oh, it's another thing I've got to do. You can feel resentment about it. And so the language I always use is experiment. What are you going to experiment on between now and when we meet at our next coaching session? And so by using the term experimentation, it can be exciting. It kind of can conjure up images of being a scientist in a lab. But more importantly than that, there's the power of the word experimentation is it's not the end of the world if it doesn't work. We know as scientists, so as a scientist myself, some experiments will work, some won't. That's just how experiments are. And a lot of my clients have said they found it really helpful to reframe how they learn by treating things as an experiment rather than seeing it as homework or seeing it as something that's I have to do and it must be perfect. Actually, let's experiment, see what works, see what doesn't, and adjust accordingly at the next session.
My reframing is my favorite concept, by the way, and I do love how we can shift the focus and change the perception when we use the word experiment versus the word homework. That changes it all completely. I love it. And I know that in your work, you also focus on how psychology research can help teams be more productive and perform better. And these days and in the future, they will be more and more remote teams. Well, that's what I believe. How do you think we can improve their performance the performance of remote teams using psychology?
So it's really interesting. So lots of my clients, so kind of corporate clients, so big companies through to kind of SMEs, so small and medium-sized companies, are asking me the same question. So I'm doing work with several companies at the moment, not necessarily about 100% remote working, but about hybrid, which I think is an even tougher space for managers to be in. I think if your team is 100% office-based or 100% remote or 100% out there, so you might have teams where they're out on the streets doing work with community. I think that to some degree, that's a bit easier for managers because everybody's in the same boat together. And so you can put in place relatively similar processes and systems that can help. But when you've got teams that are doing all those things on different days of the week, you've got some who are in the office, some who are remote working. That might mean working at home or somewhere else. Some who are out and about on the streets with customers or kind of patients. That requires a level of adaptability for managers, which, in my experience, particularly over the last 2 years with the pandemic, has been really tough. I think lots of managers haven't known if they're coming or going because they're having to kind of pivot and change their style, all the time, every day. And so I think a more important question, and as I say, indeed, the question that's coming up for most of my corporate clients is how do we help managers manage hybrid teams more effectively. And so one of the main, there's two main things that I've been exploring with different organisations. The first is, so for some managers, there's issues of control. So if somebody's not in front of me, what are they up to? If I can't see them, I don't trust they're doing what they need to. So there's issues of trust there, for example. And so I've seen some teams where the leader has insisted that everybody must come back to the traditional office. And that can undermine productivity, it can reduce morale. And so the first thing that I've been doing with some organisations is working with groups of managers and posing the question of, what does the work require? What are the roles needed? What's required of the roles, and what does the work require? Don't make it about the people. Don't make it about yourself. What is it that's going to get the best out of this role? Is this a role that must be with other human beings because of the kind of work it does? Or is it the kind of role where maybe on occasion, actually, because some deep work is needed, actually that person can work somewhere else? They don't need to be with other people and they don't need to be on site. And so that can yield a really interesting, helpful discussion around, take it back to what's our part of the business doing, what's the work that needs to be done, and what's the best way to do that work. And it can just, as I say, it can free people up when we make it about the work and not the people, if that makes sense. The second is the big thing that I've been doing work on is around how to create inclusive cultures when people are scattered to the four winds. And so an example of how to create an inclusive team environment when maybe a large proportion of your team are remote, some might be in the office. So a really practical way to create an inclusive culture, for example, is if you have a team meeting and everybody but one person is in an office, say, or together, wherever they are, it might be a conference facility, but one of the team isn't, one of the team is at home, the way to make that inclusive is everybody be on their laptops, because there's the danger of everybody being huddled together around the same laptop, for example, and the other person being on their own at the other end of the screen, is it subliminally sends the message they're all together and are an in-group and I'm excluded. And so the way that we can reduce that subliminal message is by everybody being on a laptop, even if they're sat together. Does that make sense? So it's kind of...
It's a great
giving
insight,
people,
I believe.
Thinking deeply about this stuff. That's my job, is to help managers, leaders, decision makers just think a lot more carefully about this stuff and be more intentional about decisions that are made about how teams work, whether it's fully remote, whether it's hybrid, or whether it's back in the office or whatever. Rather than it be a reactive thing, let's think about this carefully and intentionally. And think about things like inclusivity.
I love it. It's a great insight, and I think that we event professionals can take a lot from that, because we are discussing hybrid models for events a lot, and thinking through those small but in a way big things, like making the environment the same for everybody, and putting people in a place where it feels like they're doing the same things, right? That may help a lot to develop the inclusive environment, comfortable environment at an event, for example. And I would love to go deeper on that, but I'm also mindful of the time. So I think that might be a topic for another conversation with you, Hayley. I've got a couple of final questions for you, though. So in your opinion, what is one psychology insight that event professionals should apply right away?
Oh my goodness, that's a big question. One psychology insight. I think so. Look, I said right at the start that before I trained as a psychologist, I worked in conference and events as a coordinator, and I know how tough that can be. I did it for a couple of years. It can be, well, you saw how above and beyond that event professionals can go. They even give their clothes. But in all seriousness, it can be exhausting, you know, when you've got an event on, and for many of your listeners, they'll have multiple events running kind of in parallel. That's exhausting. That's, you know, and so there's something about, I think one psychological concept or tool that I would recommend to your listeners would be using something like Martin Seligman's PERMA model of well-being, because it's a really useful model to help you look after yourself. So P stands for positive emotions, for example. R is for relationships. So I shared the PERMA model last week on LinkedIn again, and it was really popular. But I think using a framework such as that to look after yourself, because only by looking after yourself can you be your best self, do your best work, and deliver excellence for your clients and deliver brilliant events. So yeah, there's so many that I could suggest, but off the top of my hat, that's one that I'd definitely suggest, is the PERMA model.
Absolutely, that's fantastic, and I've seen this sketch note, and I love it, and I think it mentions all the key things that we need to take care of ourselves. And it's like in a plane, right? They say put the oxygen mask first on yourself.
Absolutely.
Help others, like children, right? So I think that applies here as well. What are your top 3 psychological books that you would recommend to read to someone from outside of the field of psychology or behavioral science?
Oh my goodness. Some of them are books written by psychologists, but they're not necessarily psychology books, if that makes sense. But they're books that I recommend again and again to my clients. So the first is How to Have a Good Day at Work.
It's a great book.
It's fantastic, isn't it? It's by Caroline.
Webb,
Caroline, that's
it.
Just brilliant. So she's an ex-McKinsey consultant, but she draws on psychology and neuroscience and just so many different things. And I love the way the book is broken down into sections covering all aspects of our working lives. So how to negotiate, how to protect your resilience, how to have a tough conversation, you know, just all the things that many of us grapple with day in, day out. It's a brilliant book, and I've actually gifted it to some of my clients in the past. The second book that I recommend a lot is by Robert Sutton. So on Twitter, he's Bob Sutton. He's a professor at Stanford University. His book is called Good Boss, Bad Boss. So if any of your listeners are in leadership or management roles, this is a book that I recommend to anybody either in leadership or management or aspiring to go into a more senior role. It's called Good Boss, Bad Boss by Robert Sutton, and it's brilliant. It's filled with evidence, you know, what the research tells us about really good positive leadership and management, but also the ugly side of it as well, what happens when it goes wrong. Lots of case studies and lots of really useful advice and tips. So that's one I recommend. And then the third is the wonderful Brené Brown, who some of your listeners were probably well familiar with. The book that I come back to again and again is her book, Dare to Lead. So she's obviously a social psychologist, and so the heart of Dare to Lead is about courageous leadership, about those moments of vulnerability that allow us to have breakthroughs as leaders, as teams, as communities, and it's just filled with so much wisdom. And again, it's another one that I've recommended to lots of my clients. There's so many more I could recommend,
excellent.
but you've capped me at 3.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I know. It's so many books out there that are great and are tailored to wider audience. So even if you are not into the field of psychology, behavioral science, neuroscience, you can still understand a lot of concept and apply those in your professional routine. And my last question would be, so the podcast title is What If I Told You? How would you complete the sentence with one takeaway from our conversation? What if I told you?
What if I told you stress is a made-up concept?
Interesting. I think that's a good start for the second chat on this podcast.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Thank you so much for your time, Hayley. I do appreciate that. You know, that's a lot of information and a lot of great insight. Thank you so much. I encourage everyone to check Hayley's website and connect on LinkedIn and of course on Twitter, and see all those lovely, fantastic, insightful sketch notes that I'm a fan of. All the links will be in the show notes. Thank you for tuning in to What If I Told You, the Event Psychology podcast. For more brain science insights and for this episode recap, I invite you to join the Event Psychology Club. And remember, experiences take place in people's minds. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.